just getting a sense of the scale of the decommissioning project. I thought my bathroom was a big job, but this is really much bigger. Our next speaker is a geochemist with more than 20 years of experience in the UK's nuclear industry. She's a member of the UK Radioactive Substances Policy Group and has been instrumental in development of a more integrated approach to waste management here in the UK. She's currently on secondment from the Environment Agency to BEIS as Head of Radioactive Waste Infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Juliet Long.
Good afternoon, everybody. I recognise a lot of faces here, and that's great to see. Although actually sometimes I wish we'd get a lot of new faces in, because I think there's a conversation here that we need to extend in the scope. So those of you who don't know me, yes, I'm on secondment, thank you, into BEIS at the moment. I've infiltrated Whitehall. I've got some colleagues here, so watch out, they're keeping an eye on me. But yeah, my background is certainly from, actually starting out, looking at how do pollutants behave in the environment? What are environmental processes? What's that all about? And my frustration was, I was being asked to generate new research contracts. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get into industry and actually help solve some of the problems. So, gosh, I got into this nuclear industry. Fascinating, working at the Atomic Weapons Establishment and getting them to learn how to spell environment. And then I was at the UK Atomic Energy Authority, working from Dounreay up in the north. Beautiful site. Goodness me, that chance to do that kind of commute up to work, to see the oyster catchers and the seals. And fabulous. Down to Windforth, equally nice. Anyone from Windforth? And then, being power crazy, I thought, no, come on, I really want us to be doing better at this. So I got into the regulator, and so that's not enough. So now I'm trying to think about how we can do better from a policy perspective, from a government perspective. So what I want to share with you today is a perspective that we talk about waste. Waste is never an easy subject, is it? I mean, it's a pretty dirty topic. And I'm not just talking about radioactive waste in that respect. Radioactivity has a beautiful property, doesn't it? It goes away after time. Fabulous. We don't have that same benefit, with asbestos waste, whatever else. But nonetheless, radioactive waste is a challenge that we need to address and we need to deal with for all manner of different reasons. And dare I say, not just nuclear. Now, I probably press a button here and something will happen. Look at that. The pillars of the UK's industrial strategy. I know you'll all be able to tell me all about that document. It was published earlier this year, a consultation, before the election. Thankfully, we still have the same Secretary of State back in now, so he's very much championing this as being a priority for the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So what's that all about? Well, it's saying actually, where do we want the UK to be? We want the UK to be in a vibrant, competitive place that actually provides a good place to live and to work. And how do we make sure that we're best placed to address some of the challenges going forward? How do we make sure we're best placed to enable businesses to thrive going forward? Great. Now look, there's that word infrastructure up there, as well as all those other things. It kind of makes sense that you need to have in place if you're going to have a vibrant industry. I quickly turn to that infrastructure bit. And you'll have noticed that my title in BEIS is Head of Radioactive Waste Infrastructure. I made that up. They said, what are we going to call you when you come in? I said, well, how about this title? Because I'm conscious that we don't have a coherent sense of a radioactive waste infrastructure here in the UK. And I am absolutely assured of the fact that we need to have one. And I want to tell you a bit about why that is. So in the industrial strategy it was consulted upon, didn't mention radioactive waste. It mentioned waste actually in a couple of places, but not in infrastructure. But, I'm working on them. We'll get there. Where are we? Well, we produce radioactive waste from all manner of different quarters. And I know we often slip into this terminology of talking about nuclear waste, don't we? And of course, we've got radioactive waste coming from the nuclear industry, but we've got it coming at us from so many other places as well. And if we are to think about having a strong, vibrant economy in this country, if we want to be sure that we can continue to have access to those cancer care services, to the education, to the R&D that provides us with the radiopharmaceuticals that are important in a lot of the work we do, if we are to deliver decommissioning cleanup not only in the nuclear industry, but also in the oil and gas industry, to enable stainless steel production, to allow China clay production. I could go on. All of these industries produce radioactive waste. But we forget about that because we think about nuclear. And of course, nuclear is important, absolutely important. We're not getting this high-level waste that James was telling us about from those other industries, but we are getting wastes, and we need, as a society, to recognise that and to ensure that we have the arrangements in place to enable those activities to happen safely, properly, to allow business to thrive, but to absolutely make sure that we have the security and the confidence in those arrangements being secure for us. So how are we doing? Well, you'll recognise this map, it's UK. Have a look at where the dots are. These dots are the places where currently we send our radioactive waste. There's not a huge amount of places. What's my colour coding come out as? So the blue stars are our permitted facilities able to take radioactive waste. The pink ones take, watch out, pink ones take only naturally occurring radioactive material waste, so for example from the oil and gas industry. And then the green squares are where we incinerate. We have permitted commercial incinerators available to take some of the radioactive waste. So we've got a few sites, that's great, isn't it? And over on the left-hand side there, what I'm trying to remind you of are the important numbers that James shared with us. So we have an inventory of some 4.5 million cubic metres of waste. Now, what's available to us in terms of those various stars and squares and everything else is a disposal capacity of some 1.2 million cubic metres. So there's a bit of a shortfall there. We also know that the planning permissions associated with some of those facilities currently have a limited shelf life. So these facilities might not be available for much longer. Now, that 4.5 million cubic metres is going to emerge over 120 years. So, okay, maybe there's not an immediate problem, Houston, but actually that 4.5 million cubic metres doesn't involve those other quantities that might come from those other industries. And actually, what it doesn't include are those volumes that could come from the cleanup of some of the land issues on the nuclear estate. And at one site alone, I think that's predicted to be some 6 million cubic metres. If we start putting these numbers together, I'm not trying to terrify you, but all I'm trying to suggest is actually we need to be thinking a little bit more ambitiously about how we ensure we've got the capacity and the capability in place to deal with our radioactive wastes. So that's the message I'm putting into government at the moment. And that's the conversation I'm having with an awful lot of folk that I know are here in the room and elsewhere in the industry to say, actually, can we do better? How might we go about doing things better? Because from my perspective, if we want that industrial strategy to work, if we want to enable responsible use of radioactive substances, decommissioning of the civil nuclear estate, decommissioning of oil and gas, so on and so forth, we need to have confidence in that infrastructure. Now, we've already mentioned the GDF, and it's very easy to point the finger and say, well, we haven't got a geological disposal facility. Of course, we need a geological disposal facility. That will never go away. But we need much more than that. And we need to give radioactive waste management much more of a platform and consideration to ensure that we have the right skills in place. We've got some fantastic work that's going on looking at nuclear skills in this country. But actually, what that doesn't explore are those broader skills needed to manage the wastes once they come off the nuclear estate. And I know we've got some weaknesses and we've got some shortfalls in that arena. How do we put the waste to the market? How do we incentivise the supply chain? Currently, that 4.5 million cubic metres over 120 years doesn't compare to the 5 million cubic metres of hazardous waste we get on an annual basis. That gets the supply chain out of bed, not 4.5 million cubic metres over 120 years. So maybe we don't ought to have that same policy environment in place as we have for those other wastes. Maybe we need a different approach to how we develop an economy of scale, we develop some of those longer-term collaborative solutions, and we get that investment into the right skills and capabilities. How do we make sure we've got the right leadership in place and the right governance? NDA has a huge responsibility. It hasn't got the responsibility for dealing with all of this. Maybe we need to be thinking about how that is addressed. James also, I think you put about 8 different policy documents up there. You could go on in terms of some of the different vehicles that we've got available that set out government policy and thinking over the years. All I'm trying to say is if you're trying to figure out what government policy is, it ain't easy. Trying to find the right document. I think the last comprehensive review was back in the Command 2919 days. Before that, I mean, back in Flowers' report days, actually we had good advice telling us we need to be taking a much more comprehensive strategic approach, but we've really not tackled that, we've not listened to it. But now we have an ambition to be a world-class leading country, delivering performance, providing that infrastructure for business to succeed. So my challenge back to you in your communities is absolutely work with the nuclear industry, but also help us work with some of those other non-nuclear radioactive waste producing industries. Let's move the conversation, certainly from the communities, not losing it in the community, but actually let's move it up to a more societal basis, where actually we can get the UK recognising it needs access to these capabilities, to this infrastructure, and that we stop simply talking about radioactive waste in the nuclear context. That's my challenge. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.